Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And it's one of those days where I get to be really excited because I have Melanie Reinhart with me. Hello, Melanie.
Hi, Anna. I've also been looking forward to it through the afternoon, thinking, oh, nice, I'm going to have a conversation with Anna later. It's always nice.
So here we are. And here we are, not quite at the start of the year, but not far from the start of the year, looking ahead at some very interesting astrological events. What do you make of what you see coming this year?
Yeah, well, for me, one of the dominant themes is still the seemingly endless transition of the planet Pluto between Capricorn and Aquarius. And, it it has been, I feel, the dominant theme of last year as well and this year. And in particular, last year, Pluto was also it was also contacting the nodal axis right over the summer period. That's northern hemisphere summer. And really, because it moves very slowly, Pluto, um, it was within range of aspecting the nodal axis the entire year last year. And that's now pretty much that aspect has opened out and isn't anymore the dominant one, but that was the whole, almost the foundation of last year. And, the sense of pressure is always there when there's activity of Pluto. And often, or at least initially, it's a feeling of unease and of a pressure about things that you're not really sure what's going on. Sometimes through the course of the aspect, things can be revealed which you didn't know about before, but on some intuitive level, you kind of knew, even if it didn't hit your consciousness for a while. And of course, the parallel of that is things being revealed out there in the world and in the collective. So all kinds of really awful things coming to light and being revealed, and yet things which the revealing of them is like a kind of a purgative, but quite shocking and very disturbing sometimes. But a
Yes.
cleaning out and a clearing is the overall theme of that, I think. And that was like a motif that really ran through the entire year.
And
But
it's still there. And it's
absolutely,
still there. And when you're talking about, the revelations of, some horrendous things, I think we haven't even properly begun to have everything revealed
yes.
because what I is there's an incredible stench in the air,
Oh,
the
yes.
stench of something rotten. I mean, deeply, deeply rotten. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I found me, and some people have kind of got a whiff of it. You were talking about it not quite reaching consciousness yet for some people, and then it does. And I look around me, and it's that feeling of when you say, oh, can you smell something? There's something a bit smelly. Can you smell it?
Yeah.
And some people can smell it. Some people are going, oh, what a stench, really know it. And others haven't quite smelled it yet because their noses are not quite attuned to that smell
Yes.
yet. So and it's so Pluto, isn't it? Because it's that
Absolutely.
something wrong.
Yeah. And also the feeling of not being in control. This is really important with Pluto because that's a very anxiety provoking feeling when there's stuff going on in your life or that you're perceiving in the world that in fact you don't have control over. And in the heroic mode, we're all kind of brainwashed to think that our life consists of ever greater achievement and progress, in inverted commas, and always more, like the consumer mentality, more of this and more of that, and higher and better and faster and brighter, and so on and so forth. And Pluto represents something very different to that, because there are, in fact, many aspects of our human life that we're not in control of. No matter how hard we work at, getting the right techniques to succeed and do all of that stuff, in the end, that's only half the story. The other half being that learning wise ways to meet and deal with things that are undealable with, that's the other half of it, And so Pluto, in one way or another, reminds us of that. So then one also Plutonic reaction to that is to get hardline, and almost confabulate some kind of false security that we think we can stand on. We think we can come to ground in that place. And that gives rise to fanaticism, fundamentalism, and rigidity of thinking. So in a way, the whole long drawn out movement between Capricorn and Aquarius is almost guaranteed to open that up in a personal way, in one way or another. And really the beauty of that, now thinking of the movement between Capricorn and Aquarius. So in traditional astrology, both those two signs were under the rulership of Saturn. But since Uranus was discovered in, is it 1785?
Round about that,
Round about
yes.
there. Many astrologers kind of add in the rulership of Aquarius as having Uranus in there as well, which I think works brilliantly. But it's not that it's free from the Saturn influence. So Aquarius is a fixed sign and an air sign. So what we have is fixed ideas, which translates into dogmatism and ideologies. So even though Uranus is an air sign, that doesn't mean it can think straight.
No, and I think, but I think that it's interesting for me looking at Pluto. It's almost like it can start off so well, but hang about, and it will soon, it will soon lose its attraction, because I think what you're describing there is an energy that pierces hubris.
Very succinctly put. Yes, absolutely.
It really does, because if I look at what is happening and those who have the power, and let's remember this is Capricorn we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be those who are in institutions. And if that stench that I was talking about is in our institutions, because this is Capricorn we're talking about. And it's the hubris of these people who are in our institutions, but also who are behind our institutions, hidden.
Yes.
And who think that they have the rights to play God and decide who lives and dies.
Yeah.
And that they know what's best. We're talking about their own interests.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The stench is beginning to overwhelm everything, so that you can't not notice that there's something very rotten in the state of Denmark.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So I think that that's the Pluto in Capricorn, we had the warning signs in 2008 when it went into Capricorn. And we have had a major, major shift in wealth over this Pluto and Capricorn period, because nobody's ever accounted for the money that was missing.
Yeah.
But you and I and everybody else have had to pay for it. So there's that. And now we're looking at Pluto in Aquarius. We have the whole AI potential nightmare looming. But it's the same people who are driving the AI agenda.
Yes.
So it's very interesting because I think of this as the tower collapsing just now.
Yes. Yes.
It's as that corruption and rotten stuff that you're talking about becomes visible, it begins to collapse. And of course, there's going to be quite a lot of damage, and already is quite a lot of damage. Just look around the world at what's. So there's that. And then there's Aquarius. And you know, when I think about Aquarius without Uranus or Saturn, just as a sign, it's a sign of hope.
Yeah.
It's a sign of hope. So I think we put it another way, we're involved in a huge power struggle just now.
Yeah.
And it's the people wanting to take power back because they've been made to feel so powerless. And I don't know about you, but it seems that the phrase that comes to mind with Pluto going into Aquarius is power to the people, a shift.
Yes. Yes. But what I also think is if we still consider the Saturn rulership of Aquarius and the fixed ideas, there's a sort of hazard in the sign of Aquarius, which is putting everything into the future and thinking that we know the way to the better future, or dreaming up huge, wonderful ideas about what we are going to do or what is coming.
Do you know what? That puts me in mind of something else that, because of the way things have been in the last century, it always seems to me that we have Neptune, whatever Neptune idealizes, because of the speed at which everything's been moving. Pluto then comes along and goes, "Oh, you think that, do you? Is that what you really think? You think that is going to be the way forward? Right. How much do you like it? Let's see. Let's see." And I think about that period where Neptune and Uranus were conjunct in Capricorn, and
1993.
The idealism around capitalism, particularly.
Yes.
And how we had defeated communism and the world was going to be peaceful and everything was going to be so good, right? And so we have, the Big Bang, we have, all of that going on, and the liberation of the markets. And it was going to be great because everybody was going to be wealthy. Pluto comes along.
Lord of wealth.
Yeah. In Capricorn, and says, "Oh, that's what you think, is it? You think that that's the be all and end all of everything?" Wham! 2008, we get. And how free are we when we are idealizing this? It's not that I have with capitalism by any chance, but this isn't capitalism. This is the corruption of capitalism. And it's that idealism of that period of Neptune and Capricorn with Uranus, that radical idealism that produced the absolutely perfect conditions for what we've been experiencing when Pluto has been in Capricorn. And talking about Aquarius, I'm thinking about, hey, Neptune and Uranus conjunct in Aquarius, and the falling in love with the digital world and the CCTV cameras that cropped up everywhere, and Blair talking about wonderful digital ID. And I can remember them standing up and talking about how this, no, it wasn't digital ID, it was ID, but this ID card was going to hold your DNA information. And they were now going to track children to see who might have a criminal bent so that they could be. And I'm looking at that and remembering the horror of that prospect looming now with the digital connection. So I think Pluto in Aquarius is going to say, yeah, do you know what? You really like that digital stuff, do you? Well, how much do you like it if we suddenly have a social credit system?
Yeah.
How much do you like that? How much do you like that if you everything that you spend now is going to be monitored by government? And if you don't have a problem with that, because hey, if you've not done anything wrong, everything is okay. Just remember this: the rules about what's wrong can change like that.
Yeah.
And whoever has the finger on the buttons has the power. So, how much do you love the digital dream? And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Because we're at a stage where we've got Elon Musk promoting uh, incubators so that women no longer have to carry babies. And this is meant to be incredibly liberating for women. So is that what we want? It's about our humanity, isn't it?
Yes, and you know what comes to mind? Well, first of all, a piece of astronomical trivia which came to mind when you were speaking. You know that Pluto spends a portion of its orbit actually inside Neptune's orbit, and so Pluto's orbit goes right through the orbital path of Neptune. And that came to mind when you something you said just triggered off that memory about that, which is so evocative. Um, because, oh yes, it was when you spoke about the piercing of the hubris.
Yes.
And so, in a way, Neptune uh, uh, is a place in the horoscope where we might well find our deepest dreams in terms of the most profound inspiration. And we may also find dreams in the sense of fantasies, which are escape mechanisms or delusions.
Delusions. And I
So
just
Pluto has a way of cutting through that.
absolutely. And I just think that with Uranus, with those two Uranus conjunctions that I was talking about, Uranus Neptune conjunctions. Of course,
Yeah.
we've had it in Pisces as well. It's again, it's radicalized idealism. It's radical idealism, and
Yes.
I just that it's quite extreme when you think about it. That combination, um, and how do we translate that into reality without it becoming madness?
Mm.
That's the
You
question.
know that the Uranus Neptune conjunctions which you mentioned, so they were the dominant aspect of specifically 1993, but they're both pretty slow moving. So the few years around 1993 marked the beginning of that new cycle. And that was in Capricorn. And almost incredibly, the recent conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in 2020, it was in almost exactly the same degree area as that Uranus Neptune in 1993. And I remember in 1993, I remember looking ahead and noticing that Saturn Pluto and kind of wondering, as you do, wow, will I still be alive then? And wow, I wonder what that'll be like, and so on, and wow, now it's in the past already. But one thing that I do feel about the sign of Aquarius, it is very focused on the mind, and that can mean a whole lot of misapplied beliefs and things which are incredibly distorted or very disconnected or very ideologically based, and all these things that we've been talking about. But at the same time, it's a tremendous opportunity. Pluto, Lord of Transformation, going through Aquarius, which is air sign, fixed sign. So if we have the opportunity and the time and the will to do it, there's like a spotlight. Now, that's not quite the right word for Pluto. It has to be the dark equivalent of a spotlight. A dark light, we'll call it a dark light, okay? A dark light can shine inwardly onto our own fixed ideas, false ideologies, fanaticisms, beliefs, in quotes, which are actually no more than a rationalized emotional reaction, which is all over at the moment. And so to learn about how we do that stuff inside our own head, that's a very inspiring place to start, I think.
It is. And it's very interesting because I have been involved in a couple of interviews recently where I was interviewed to actually explain the process by which we do exactly that. We
Okay.
rationalize, but at the same time, to explain how it's possible that we can be manipulated quite easily. So I've been doing that, but I've since then noticed the number of people, hypnotherapists primarily, it seems, um, talking about this subject because
Exactly.
of the awareness that we have of the degree to which the public are being manipulated,
Yes.
um, and those kind of understand that, going, how is it possible? And I'm going, okay, well, this is, we're saying, okay, well, this is how it works, this is why it's possible. I know it doesn't mean that people are weak or that people are not clever, but we are all susceptible
Mm-hmm.
because by virtue of our humanity. And here's the thing: the more we believe that we are rational, the more susceptible we become,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we fall into the trap of not understanding that actually we're being driven by our emotions and subconscious drives. And if we fall into the hubris of thinking that we are rational at all times, that's where we are our most vulnerable. Whereas at least if we know that we are vulnerable, we can keep a check on ourselves and we can
Exactly.
we engage in critical thinking, which is vital at this point. And that brings us back to Aquarius, because Aquarius is about critical thinking, because it's also about freedom. And I'm seeing quite a lot of that going on at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. And in a way, given that Aquarius is the third one of the three air signs, potentially that can be where the mind is is able to be developed to the extent that it can help us be free from the negative impact of the collective. It doesn't mean that we disengage, because in Aquarius, we know very deeply that nobody is an island. And yet that brings the paradox is that what goes on within our own soul in that quote unquote separate sense, although we know at a deeper level, nothing is separate from anything. We're all one. But at another level, taking care of that paradox becomes a very rich kind of personal work, because I'm thinking now of the time-honored phrase about the mystical way, which is to be in the world but not of it. The opposite being to be of the world but not in it. That's the kind of upside down version of that. And that's kind of something we can see everywhere. being completely embedded in and lost in the ways of the world,
Absolutely.
but not even in it.
And I think too that that's made me think about the collective nature of Aquarius. I feel that as the majority no longer can avoid the stench and have to act on it, that there is going to be a collective shift. And I think that the challenge is going to be to act on it with grace, not with, how can I put this? It's about forgiveness, really. And Pluto is completely unforgiving. But if we as human beings want to move beyond the karma that is currently afflicting us, we're going to have to learn to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it does not mean that we condone, tolerate, or allow anyone to get away with any of the things that they've been doing. But we have to be very balanced about it and not allow our anger to take over, as did, I mean, the American Revolution, the French Revolution. The French Revolution had so much vengeance in it. And, that's Pluto in Aquarius as well, and so we have these ideals of how we want the world to be, but we're going to be merciless and, bring tyranny in
Yeah.
order to achieve that. It doesn't work like that. And that French Revolution particularly took that tone. So we want to not do that. We want to not do that. And I think that's quite important. But we can't seem to get away from Uranus because we've got this Jupiter Uranus conjunction this year as well. What do you feel
Yes.
about?
Well, I do think it's very interesting. So just for reference here, Uranus went into Taurus in May of 2018. And by the time the conjunction with Jupiter comes, it will already be at 21 degrees of Taurus. So it's in the last third of the sign, getting ready to change sign eventually, which it will actually do next year in July. It goes into the sign of Gemini. So a few thoughts come to mind about the conjunction. First of all, it's one of the aspects. Oh, I'll talk about the other one shortly, but it's one of the aspects that's actually within orb, meaning that they're close enough in the aspect to be resonating together. That resonance pretty much began already. And it will go on until the middle of the year. So although the ping is on the 21st of April, you can think of this energy being, quite a dominant resonation through the first 6 months of this year. And any of you who know your horoscopes, if you've got any planet in roughly 21 degrees of any of the fixed signs, and that is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, then you'll have a ringside seat on this one. I mention all the above just because that resonance seems to be around already. So just looking at where those kind of themes might be especially obvious, it suggests stuff to do with money. And, in already the year 2000, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was in Taurus there. And I mean, I'm not a mundane astrologer because I don't consider myself well enough educated about such things. But even I thought, oh wow, big shocking innovations in the money system. And if we just think about that, that was a prelude. And now we've had Uranus also in Taurus, and many, many changes, in the banking system and in just simple things like how people pay for the services and goods that they need. And, the rise of all kind of online things like PayPal and international currency transfers and Bitcoins. And of course, along with that, all kinds of money scams. Wow. So I'm wondering if there'll be a big money scam that will shockingly come to light around that time. And that's just, I was going to say, a fun or tongue-in-cheek prediction, but more I say that out of curiosity. Certainly on an individual level, and this is something I'm noticing already, is that a kind of innovation, maybe a shocking one, or a one that brings a sense of relief and goes, oh, wow, concerning our own finances and how we manage them, what we do with our money, and even things like giving to charity or not, or how to be more thrifty if that's
Or,
necessary, ways of saving money or using one's money in a more enlightened way. Also, Jupiter is a planet which often has an energy of generosity about it. So generosity and increase is also possible around this. So a very interesting combination. It is a very high energy combination, no matter what sign it's in. We can sort of trace it back through other times. And it's a very high energy aspect. And so that also needs a bit of wisdom in how we meet it, because it might be easy to get kind of swept along in a current of the high energy, because it will be in many ways such a contrast to some of the really kind of down pulling heavy duty energies of Capricorn that was so dominant for the last few years, and that now there's a glimmer that things are lightening up. So one of the feelings I have about this, it may be important to really work towards personal balance and personal equanimity as far as possible, because that's not an ideal to be achieved. Otherwise, you'll be certain to probably end up, flat on your face, metaphorically speaking. But just to be able to meet these really rather special energies in as peaceful and calm way as we can, rather than getting buffeted about by all the collective tornadoes and things that are going on, And speaking of tornadoes, there might well be, I guess, because it is an earth sign. So we might see, more volcanic eruptions or tornadoes or that kind of, natural dramatics. We might see some more of those around that time.
I think the best thing that we could do with this energy is really tune into nature,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
you can already see that that Uranus and Taurus has been very disruptive to those who work with the land, shall we say, because
Absolutely.
we have edicts which are being placed upon farmers.
Yes.
And for the first time I can remember, farmers are in revolt
Yeah,
and across
exactly.
Europe. And I don't think we're going to be far behind by because we seem to be doing what everybody else is doing, or at least heading in that direction. So we can see that disruption. But at an
Yes,
individual level, I think for us to really consider the importance of nature in terms of working in harmony with her.
absolutely. And, I'm just thinking, it was only today I got the news by email that with the notes and recordings and everything, of a debate in Parliament about the relationship between the farmers and the consumers and the role that the supermarkets play in that. And so that they're trying to move towards much fairer legislation about that to protect the farmers. And so, one of the rules here is that anybody can create a petition. Anybody can petition Parliament over any issue that they choose. And if more than 100,000 people sign the petition, they have to debate it in Parliament. And so that happened with this petition, which got, I think 115,000 votes. And so that's part of what you're referring to. So
Yeah.
awareness, as in Uranus, the light goes on, awareness about the whole economics and the practical reality of, getting food from the farm to our plates, and what works and what absolutely doesn't, and what's okay and what is so unfair it cannot go on. And
Yeah.
these are things which have not really been brought into public awareness before, but they are now. And it's not only here in the UK, obviously.
No, but there are some interesting things happening in Britain this year, not least of which we're going to be going through a nodal return.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, a nodal return is very much like any conjunction. It's the marker of the beginning of a new cycle, which also therefore means that the run up to that, I can't remember what's the exact date of that nodal
I
return.
can't remember the exact date. I know it's at 19 degrees. So I think that we've kind of been skirting around it already. It may already have started last year because last year I think it went as high as 18. I can't remember whether it went 19, but certainly we've been skirting around it.
Yes, and so that also means, as it's the beginning of a
I
new
correct myself,
cycle.
Melanie. I was thinking of Chiron being at around 19 degrees.
Oh,
Like,
yes,
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 sorry. I was also looking at the US's Chiron return happening this year as well.
yes,
So,
exactly.
my mind was in two places at once. But no, it's the nodal return is happening this year, but I can't remember the exact date.
Yeah, that's what I thought, that it's sometime this year. So because that's the beginning of a new cycle, it also means that the run-up period to it, certainly a few months worth, but even up to a year, because it's quite a long cycle, the nodal cycle, it's about 19 years. So the end bit of that is like the last dregs of the outgoing cycle. And this is coinciding with Pluto going through again and again the last dregs of Capricorn. And, England is a Capricorn country anyway. So it feels very heavy and very sticky at times.
It does. The the Pluto transits that we're experiencing. The thing is, it's also Pluto is going to oppose Jupiter in this country's 10th house. So
Oh,
I'm looking
okay.
and I'm wondering what it's going to be revealed about government.
Yes. Well, it seems to be, there are daily revelations about, you know, toxic stuff going on in the government and in the
Uh,
system. And it's just, that's how it is at the moment.
well, with Pluto, there's no place to hide, so we shall
Yeah,
see
I
what
like the way you
comes.
put that. Yes.
Because you see, the other thing is we've got Chiron square the moon as well. And the moon represents the people, so it's the pain, I think, of the people
Yes,
that's that's being heard.
as well, because the other aspect, remember I mentioned that the Jupiter Uranus um, is within range of its conjunction for the first 6 months of this year. And likewise with the Chiron conjunct the North Node. So it will be exact on the 5th of March coming right up. That's the so-called mean node, which is simply the average. Some people use the true node, but some people use the mean node, but there's only a couple of degrees difference anyway. And so that conjunction is on the 5th of March, and it will be at 1727 of Aries. So in similar vein, any of you who've got any of your planets in the 18th degree, so 17 plus, of any of the cardinal signs, this is very special for you. Cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. So what's also quite special around that is that the following month after that, the full moon on the 8th of April has Chiron exactly in the same degree as, wait a minute, have I got this right? I think I meant new moon. Let me just double check that. Mixed up my moons. Yeah, I meant the new moon. Cross that out on my notes here. So at the new moon, which is, if you recall, that's when the sun and moon are in the very same degree, in this case of Aries. And in this case, Chiron is in that very same degree. So whatever the process of these few months might be in your own personal life, that new moon might be a very special time in terms of healing, awakening, mentorship. You know, I've already spoken with one person this year who totally found somebody who she knows is going to be, well, or is now a major teacher for her. So when Chiron conjuncts the nodal axis like that, it's not unusual for very significant people to come into our lives. People who are spiritual teachers or philosophers or agents of awakening in one kind or another. It might not be a person you meet in the flesh. It could even be like Plato, who's been dead, at least physically, for centuries and centuries, but you might read something and get it, you know. This will date me horribly, but there used to be, in common parlance, this marvelous word called grok. So if you grok something, you absolutely get it. You don't just read it or see it or think about it. It's like you're transfixed, and on every level, every cell in your body and your consciousness, you get it, you know. And so that kind of experience goes with Chiron because, you know, Chiron, remember, was discovered in between Saturn and Uranus. And that, you know, that is such a rich bit of symbolism, really. One could speak for hours just about that symbolism, because Saturn, if you recall, represents like the edge of the known universe, because it's the furthest out planet that's easily visible with the naked eye. From Uranus outwards, all the planets were discovered with increasing levels of technology and are not visible. Now, I believe that some people have seen Uranus and so on, but that's really unusual and whatever. But it was discovered anyway through maths and physics, and likewise everything outwards from there. So there's a tremendous kind of edge there, a quantum leap, if you will. And good old Chiron sits right in the middle of that. Not for its entire cycle, mind you. It does come sometimes far enough in to cross over the pathway of Saturn. But when it's in Aries, it's actually the furthest out point that it gets. So this word grok, so in my youth, that was common parlance, that word. Everybody knew what that meant. And so something of that nature can come into our life, something that is an agent of awakening. As I say, whether that's a person or not doesn't matter, whether they're alive or not doesn't matter either. It's just something that you grok. It's like it was delivered unto you unexpectedly and has a big impact. And that impact can range from a very strong internal sense of awakening, having the scales fall from one's eyes, to a specific motif of guidance, something that you have to do. Now, normally, if there is such a thing as normal at the moment, I don't know that there is, but never mind. Normally, Aries is a sign very much associated with action. And it's action at different levels. The rawest level, let's say, can be just pure instinct. And sometimes that can cause more trouble than it ever thought of. But sometimes an instinctual action can turn out to have been very enlightened and serves to unlock situations, and to move energy along and to inspire people and get people on side and so forth. But remember, Aries is not a builder in the way that Capricorn is. So typically, and if we're talking about an individual, depending on the rest of the horoscope, Aries won't be somebody that particularly likes to kind of hang around and deal with all the boring, mundane details and endure the slow pace of the material realm and challenges and limitations and all that kind of thing. Doesn't do very well with that. Of course, there are plenty of people who will have Aries who've got other counterbalancing things in the chart that will serve to kind of slow that down a bit, or not fan the fire too high because it's already high enough, kind of thing. So it is a very particular energy. And again, for me, the best way to approach or to meet an energy like that is to try, if possible, to have as much space around you. So that could be literally in terms of maybe, take a few days out of your schedule to just be with that energy and create a kind of a receptive, welcoming space inside your own heart and mind where that energy can show up. Because it will show up anyway. And if you're consciously participating, it can be a deeply joyful kind of experience. So there may be important health matters that come to light for you or that you're introduced to in terms of things that support your health and so forth. I think they're a little similar to the Uranus Jupiter, which is it's a high energy transit, and that is anchored to some degree because it's in an earth sign, so it might be very literal things. But this Chiron on the North Node is a very high energy thing as well. And because it's directly stimulating the North Node, that is something about where we're going. So that could be collectively some significant developments show up, but also individually. So because it's kind of going on in what we might call the anima mundi, the soul of the world, that energy is there for all of us, even if we don't have planets that will be touched by that particular aspect, which is why being able to approach that time with a kind of openness and receptivity, probably something very beneficial.
and and crucial, because it's made me think about the what I was saying earlier when we were talking about Pluto and Aquarius and people waking up to things and being, and the challenge being how we handle that. Because
Yes.
actually talking about Aries, we can't dodge the issue of anger. And so here we have Chiron in Aries. We've got the nodes in Aries. We have in this country Chiron squaring the moon and a nodal return, so Aries again, plus the US going through a Chiron return.
Yes.
So there's the potential here is for a lot of anger. And I think both at a collective level and at an individual level, we need to look at it. Comes back to what I was saying about how we deal with things. It's we have to be strong and assertive without being swept away by our anger. And you know, you were talking about how Aquarius can be dogmatic, and I think the righteous indignation can get out of hand.
That's the phrase.
Righteous indignation
That's
can,
the phrase.
and however righteous it might be to begin with, we have to understand ourselves and our own anger before we start expressing it, or actually even worse, before we start condemning the anger of others. We have
Yes,
to
yes, exactly. I can't resist here a little personal anecdote, which is actually kind of embarrassing, but I think probably there's some viewers out there who will relate to this. So if there's one thing that gets me ragingly angry, it's when I'm trying to do some piece of administrative stuff, which I know used to be simple, or I think queries fixed up, fixed idea. I think it should be simple. So I call my bank, and it turns into a kind of nightmare situation of 2 weeks worth of phone calls to and fro. No, only two, because they don't ever call you back. Where I can't get through. And by the time I have got through, I've only got like 5 minutes to talk. And then I've lost the notes of what I was going to ask them. And this goes on and on and on. And to get the whatever it is done, there's all kinds of hoops one has to jump through. And then, then the phone line goes dead. This is a collated example. This didn't all happen at the same time, but it's an archetype, if you like. And, then the phone line goes dead, and the phone system is such that I can't get back to talking to the same person. I have to ring the same number, and I'll get, any Jack or Jill who hasn't got a clue about who I am, because, never met or don't do face-to-face banking because they shut all the banks. And so then I have to tell the whole story all over again to get them on board, to help them to do something. And there was a time I would get so angry that I was so horrible to these poor people. Oh, cringe, after the phone call. I felt so ashamed of myself and so embarrassed and so on and so forth. So I just thought, this is really not on. I don't want to be behaving in this way, because ultimately, they're just poor, benighted human beings like the rest of us, doing a job that maybe they're having a lot of stress with or don't even like, etc. So I tried to dream up another approach. And so the next time, I remember this very well, and I can't even remember who it was or what the issue was, but it doesn't matter. I decided I would engage them in conversation. Now this was a late night computer helpline thing. And so I decided I would engage them in a conversation instead of getting really ugly and mean and horrible, And so I did. And it was so amazing. This was actually a fellow who I thought I could hear an Indian accent. And so I asked him where he was speaking from. Oh, and I could hear that he got all anxious at first when I asked that, because there's occasionally, people making rude remarks about people in the call centers abroad and they can't understand them and all that. Well, that was not my experience. But anyway, I said, where he's speaking from, and I could hear him, oh no. And he said he was in India. And I said, oh, wonderful. I spent about a year total in India, and went on about how much I loved India, all true. And then he said that he was in the new name is Bangalore, used to be called Bangalore. And so we ended up in this hour-long conversation about each other and our lives. And he asked me, what brought me to India, and I spoke about that. And it was absolutely wonderful. And we were kind of laughing, and it was, turned into a kind of mutual appreciation society. And we were laughing and giggling. And he said, if you're ever back in Mangaluru, you must let me know. And it was at that sort of level where I said, yeah, he said, I'll meet you and take you around. I said, yeah, that would be lovely. And of course, on the practical level, that ain't going to happen. And we didn't even think of exchanging contact information. That didn't matter. It was the sentiment that mattered. And so I made a policy of trying to do this wherever possible, try to engage the person in a conversation. And often, of course, they can't, because maybe the boss is breathing down their neck. Well, they've got a certain number of things to tick off before they go off shift or any of that. But that's my policy now. And I certainly feel better about it. From a selfish point of view, for me, I feel a lot better when I do that. Remembering the reality of it rather than getting all reactive because because I think, well, these banks, they're just closing everywhere and they're forcing people not to use cash. And so to let all of that prejudice, that's another good word for Aquarius, in fact.
Yeah.
A prejudice based on beliefs that maybe you haven't even thought them through properly. You don't even know what you believe until you start looking. So that's one of my hopes for Pluto in Aquarius. It'd be like unearthing some of these mental things that can be very toxic, and we have them. It's not just that we're influenced by
And
what's going on in the media. They can be endemic in us.
it's
They
right.
may
And
be inherited from ancestors or developed as a kind of personal ideology based on emotional trauma. So that
and
the emotion gets fixed into the beliefs. And those are the ones that are very hard to dislodge unless you really understand what's happening in there. So
and
that's
I
my hopes.
that's a perfect note to end on, because here's the thing. Aquarius is an air sign, but just think, aqua, there's water in there.
Exactly.
It's the
This is the
water,
water bearer.
it's
Yes,
the
yes,
water. And so we have to remember this, that we have to understand the role that emotion plays in in the way that we actually think. So we're back to rationalizing emotion, not being aware that we're rationalizing emotion, and so on. So really, if we understand that the ideal of being rational has its merits, but only up to a point, because without feeling, it's cold and cruel.
mm,
And equally, we have to understand that emotion can also lead us astray, and we need to have that balance. It's the sweet water. The water bearer is the sweet water. It's
yes,
been purified. So we need to clean up our act basically at an individual level in order to have a chance of cleaning up our act collectively. And
yes,
that is being aware, and we're back to the Aries again, being aware of all of those, all of that anger that's within us. And you were, your story, you were talking, it's about being human and being humane with
yeah,
our fellow human beings. And I was thinking also about targeted anger, because
yes,
one of the strategies that I've developed over the years is, when faced with the stupidity of the system, is I don't, like, for instance, I had an issue with a vet about, I guess, 7 years ago now. And my vet was absolutely wonderful and I loved her. She was not the problem, but the system she was in was the problem. So when I complained to the practice, I protected her. I said, look, this has just happened. This is not an issue to do with the vet. This is an issue to do with you and your protocols.
mm,
Do something about it. And that was completely different, because it
yeah,
protected everyone
yeah,
except the system.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that this year, above all other years, it seems, we have to target our anger
Mm.
wisely at where the
Yeah.
problem, rather than creating more collateral damage. I
Yeah.
think we don't want to create more collateral damage than has already been created by the perpetrators. What we
Yeah.
want is we want to target the system and change the system.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, then we will have succeeded in cleaning up our collective act, but we will also be holding ourselves in that sovereignty and dignity that the highest aspect of Aries is about.
Yeah. Thinking here of the sun, which is traditionally the signifier of royalty. The sun is exalted in the sign of Aries. So that's a lovely connection. I just also thought of something to do with aqua and the water bearer and so on. I remember a long time ago in a class, a student asked me what I thought about the fact that, Aquarius is the last of the air signs and a fixed sign, but, you know, but it's the water bearer. And in the discussion, what came out was, if we think of Aquarius as the third one, so potentially the most developed or most evolved one of all of the air signs. And to me, that that's a reminder that if we truly understand something, the natural response will be compassion, and that's the water, you know. Also,
Absolutely.
just thinking of Aquarius being opposite the sign of Leo, which physically is associated with the heart, you know.
I was thinking about that. I was, when you were talking about the extremes of Aquarius and you were highlighting them, I was thinking we need to remember that Aquarius is opposite is Leo, and we need to draw on that heart energy of Leo
Yes,
to
in an
form.
individual way,
Yes,
because the sign of Leo, um, the whole notion of the sacredness of individuality is really important. And that's a whole different thing than individualism in a kind of immature narcissistic sense.
it's the sanctity of life. And I think that as we go into this Pluto in Aquarius period, what is really the challenge to us is to remember the sanctity of life,
Mm.
because life has become too cheap. Life
Mm.
should never be cheap, but life has become cheap in the eyes of too many people with power.
Mm.
And we have gone along with it because we haven't understood fully the peril that we have been in adopting ideologies which are not humane.
Mm.
So, this is an opportunity to purify all of that by getting rid of the things that are holding us back from following that Aquarian ideal of true unity of humanity. So, buckle up, folks. We're in for a ride, I think. Melanie, thank you. You've given us so much food for thought. And I hope that those who are watching feel inspired. Yes, these are very turbulent times. Yes, they can be very frightening, but there is hope, and the hope begins within the hearts of each and every one of us.
Mm. Yeah.
So, if people want to find out what you are up to, Melanie, how do they do that?
Well, if you go to my website, which is just my name, so melaniereinhart.com, you can sign up to subscribe to a list of people I send newsletters to. They're not monthly or regularly, but occasional newsletters. And also on the homepage of my website, there is a tab called events. And I usually manage to keep that up to date. um, but yes, and my website, I have to say, you have been warned. It's like a jungle, really. Needs a big reorganize and go through, which I keep putting off. But there's a lot of stuff there for you to browse.
It is full of information, and I always enjoy my visits there. So Melanie, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. I always enjoy speaking with you. Um,
I
and
think
there's always the feeling, wow, we could go on for another few hours, you know.
we could absolutely go on for another few hours. We could. Oh, but thank you all for watching. Now, just keep an eye out. Also, speaking of events, on courses which I'm running, and there's always something interesting for you to follow. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye bye, everybody.